I and my dad have been estranged since I moved out to live exclusively with my mom after a brutal custody battle when I was 17. My stepmother has tormented me for years, and now they expect me to help with her high-risk pregnancy. Let me back up a bit. My parents divorced when I was 7, and my dad remarried when I was 10. My stepmother immediately took issue with my existence, not exaggerating. Within months of marrying my dad, she demanded a DNA test to verify I was actually his daughter. I remember sitting at the kitchen table overhearing this conversation. The test obviously confirmed what everyone already knew, but the damage was done. Throughout my childhood, Layla made it clear I was an unwelcome reminder of my dad's previous marriage. She would accidentally forget to pick me up from school activities, throw away gifts I made for my dad, and constantly make digs about how I looked nothing like him, despite the DNA test proving otherwise. The real breaking point came 3 years ago when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was stage 2, treatable. During one of my weekend visits at my dad's house, Layla casually mentioned that some women deserve what happens to them, and that my mom's negative energy was why Layla had suffered 2 miscarriages previously. She literally blamed my mom's existence for her fertility issues. I was 15 and completely stunned. When I told my dad what she said, he just sighed and said, "She's under a lot of stress about trying to get pregnant again." That was the moment I knew I needed to get out. I started documenting everything with the help of my therapist. After nearly 2 years of documentation, therapy reports, and court appearances, I won the right to live exclusively with my mom at 17. Since then, my contact with my dad has been limited to occasional phone calls and obligatory holiday visits that I keep as brief as possible. Fast forward to now, I started college last month, taking a relatively light course load for my first semester while adjusting to campus life. Everything was going pretty well until I got a call from my dad yesterday. He started the conversation normally, asking about classes and dorm life. Then he announced that Layla is 6 months pregnant with a high-risk pregnancy that requires bed rest and constant monitoring. Apparently, it's a miracle she's made it this far, given her history, and they're doing everything possible to ensure the baby arrives safely. Here is where things changed. My dad explained that Layla needs someone to help around the house while he works, and since I'm only taking a few classes, his words, he expects me to step in 3 days a week. He went on for almost 5 minutes outlining his expectations: meal preparation, house cleaning, and keeping Layla company during her bed rest. I listened as he continued. "You're an adult now. Family steps up during difficult times, regardless of past issues." I remembered all the horrible things Layla had said and done over the years. The night she told me my mother's cancer was karma for stealing my dad years ago kept replaying in my head. I finally managed to say that I couldn't do it, reminding him of how she had treated me and my mom. His tone immediately shifted from reasonable to angry. He said I was being selfish, that this pregnancy could literally kill her, and that I was refusing to help my own sibling. When I wouldn't budge, he went straight to, "Your mother poisoned you against us. This proves it." I ended the call when I couldn't take anymore. Within minutes, I started getting texts from my paternal aunt saying I need to be the bigger person and set aside teenage grudges to help family in crisis. Apparently, my dad immediately called her after our conversation to clarify, since many are asking. I've been in therapy for years dealing with the emotional abuse from Layla and my dad's enabling behavior. My therapist has helped me establish boundaries with them, which is why I was able to finally stand up for myself during the custody process. I'm not making this decision lightly or out of some petty teenage rebellion. The thing is, part of me feels guilty. Not for Layla. I honestly don't care what happens to her after how she's treated me and my mom for years, but for my half-brother. He didn't ask to be born to such a toxic person, and I already feel protective of him even though he's not born yet. At the same time, the thought of spending 3 days a week in that house makes me physically ill. I still have nightmares about living there. I called my mom to get her perspective, and she said it's entirely my decision, and she'll support whatever I choose. She pointed out that there are home health aides and countless other solutions that don't involve me sacrificing my mental health and education. My dad could easily hire someone, but he's trying to make me feel obligated, which is a pattern with him. What's making this harder is the other family members now getting involved. My cousin just texted saying I'm being heartless and that family comes first. Easy for them to say when they weren't the ones being emotionally abused for years. My phone has been blowing up with messages from relatives who never bothered to check how I was doing during the custody battle, but now suddenly have opinions about my family responsibilities. I feel like I'm being manipulated into a caretaker role for someone who celebrated when my own mother got cancer. My dad is framing this as me abandoning a sick pregnant woman and an unborn baby, rather than me protecting myself from someone who has caused me immense pain. He's forgetting all the documentation that was presented during the custody hearing, documentation that was serious enough for a judge to grant me full-time residence with my mom. Part of me wants to send screenshots of some of Layla's worst messages to the family group chat just to shut everyone up, but I know that would only escalate the situation. My therapist always advised against engaging in the drama tactics they use. Still, it's tempting when everyone is painting me as the villain. I'm standing firm in my decision not to help, but the constant messages and guilt trips are taking a toll. I've been having trouble sleeping and focusing on my studies since this all started. This was supposed to be my fresh start at college, away from all the family drama that consumed my high school years. I feel like I'm going crazy. Is it normal for parents to expect their barely adult children to drop everything and become caretakers for people who abused them? Or am I missing something fundamental about family obligations here? Now for the first update. Wow, I did not expect my post to blow up like that. Thank you all for the supportive comments and helpful advice about my stepmom situation. I've been trying to read everything, but there's just so much to process. So it's been about a week since my original post, and things have somehow gotten even more intense, because of course they have. My phone has been absolutely flooded with messages from my dad's side of the family. I'm talking aunts, uncles, cousins, even people I barely remember meeting at family reunions, suddenly having strong opinions about my family responsibilities. Funny how they care now when they were nowhere to be found during the custody battle, right? Most of these relatives have no idea about Layla's history of treating me poorly. They're just getting my dad's version where I'm a teenager refusing to help a pregnant woman in distress. Eye roll. I've gotten everything from gentle just checking in messages to straight-up accusations of being selfish and cruel. One uncle I haven't spoken to in 3 years had the audacity to text me that I'm throwing away my chance at redemption. Redemption for what exactly? The messages got so overwhelming that I had to silence notifications on my phone. My roommate actually asked if someone had died because my phone kept buzzing non-stop during our study session. Mortifying. Then yesterday happened. I was between classes when someone knocked on my dorm room door. I opened it, expecting my hallmate, who usually borrows my notes, but instead found my Aunt Clara standing there, internal screaming. For context, Clara is my dad's older sister and has always played peacemaker in family conflicts, which usually means pressuring whoever is standing up for themselves to keep the peace, aka shut up and take it. "We need to talk," she said. I was so shocked I just let her in, still kicking myself for not saying I was busy. During our conversation, I learned that Layla was briefly hospitalized last week for pregnancy complications. According to Clara, my dad is telling everyone that Layla's condition is worsened by stress over my abandonment, because apparently I'm responsible for her blood pressure now. The manipulation is so obvious, it would be laughable if it wasn't so infuriating. The one positive aspect in all this is my mom. As soon as I told her about everyone messaging me, she sprung into action. Her mother, my grandmother, temporarily moved in with her so mom could drive to campus and support me through this family crisis. She brought me comfort food and sat with me while I vented. I seriously have the best mom ever. Clara insisted we meet for coffee the next day, claiming she had information that might change your perspective on the situation. I agreed, just to get her out of my dorm room, honestly. My mom offered to come with me as backup, but I decided to handle it myself, trying to be an adult and all that. That coffee meeting was something else. We met at the campus cafe, and Clara waited until I'd taken my first sip of coffee before sliding her phone across the table. So theatrical, I swear. On the screen was a video of Layla in a hospital bed. She was speaking directly to the camera. "OP, I know we've had our differences, but I'm trying to bring your brother into this world safely. I need your help. Family has to come first now." I felt ill watching it. Not because I was moved, but because I recognized the manipulation tactics she's used my entire life, Clara believed every second of it. To answer the top questions from my last post: 1. Yes, I'm still in therapy and discuss this with my therapist. 2. No, my dad definitely can afford help but is choosing emotional manipulation instead. 3. Yes, I documented this new development just like my therapist recommended. She specifically asked for you, Clara emphasized, taking back her phone. She wants to make amends. People change, especially when facing their mortality. I counted to 5 like my therapist taught me before telling Clara about some of Layla's actions she might not be aware of. I told her about the time Layla threw away my Mother's Day gift when I was 12, claiming, "You only have one real mother, and it's me," despite the fact that she'd spent the previous 2 years making it clear she didn't want to be my mother at all. Clara seemed uncomfortable as I continued with more examples. The accidentally ruined school projects, the canceled rides leaving me stranded, the cruel comments about my mother's cancer. I kept my voice steady and just stated facts, no dramatics needed. The truth is damning enough. She told me that Mom's cancer was karma, I said. She said some women deserve what happens to them. She said this in front of Dad, and he did nothing. Clara said, I had no idea it was that bad. For the first time, I felt someone from my dad's side actually heard me. Edit. A lot of you asked about why my extended family didn't know about Layla's behavior before. The simple answer is that my dad and Layla were good at maintaining their family image in public. Layla saved her worst behavior for when we were alone or just with my dad present. During family gatherings, she acted affectionately toward me. The custody hearing details were kept relatively private. My dad told everyone it was just about me wanting to spend more time with my mom during her recovery. Before leaving, Clara admitted she never knew the full story, but she still suggested that maybe the pregnancy had changed Leela. She said, "Don't you want a relationship with your half-brother?" As if that's even remotely the issue here. That evening, I got a text from my dad with what he clearly thought was a reasonable compromise. Just come on weekends to help prepare the nursery, without having to interact much with Layla, who would mostly be in the bedroom on bed rest. Convenient how her medical needs align perfectly with avoiding accountability. I called my mom immediately to discuss it. She reminded me that whatever I decided, it should be my choice and not the result of guilt or manipulation. After thinking it over and another emergency session with my therapist, I reluctantly agreed to help with nursery preparations on weekends only, with strict conditions. I won't provide direct care to Lila, I won't stay overnight, and I leave immediately if anyone tries to pressure me into doing more. I sent my conditions in writing, documented everything, as many of you suggested, and my dad agreed surprisingly quickly. Too quickly, honestly, which makes me suspicious. Part of me wonders if this was the plan all along. Ask for something outrageous, 3 days a week of caretaking, so that the actual goal, weekend help, seems reasonable by comparison. Negotiation tactic my dad uses in his business. I'm going there this weekend to start on the nursery, and I'm already anxious about it. My mom is going to drive me and wait nearby in case things go sideways. She's seriously the best. I keep reminding myself I'm doing this for my half-brother, not for Layla or my dad. Thank you all again for your support with this family situation. It's made a world of difference knowing I'm not alone in thinking their behavior is completely unreasonable. Now for the second update. I didn't think I'd be back so soon with another update, but here we are. Thank you all for your support on my previous posts about the Layla situation. Reading your comments has helped me feel less crazy about this whole mess. So it's been 2 weekends now of me going to Dad's house to work on the nursery. I've been sticking strictly to my boundaries, only going on weekends, focusing solely on nursery prep, and avoiding direct interaction with Layla as much as possible. She's mostly stayed in the bedroom during my visits, which has been a relief. I've been painting walls, assembling furniture, and organizing baby stuff. Dad has been weirdly overappreciative the whole time. Every 5 minutes, this means so much to Layla, or Layla is so grateful you're helping with the baby's room. I've reminded him repeatedly that I'm doing this for my future half-brother, not for Layla, but he keeps acting like this is some grand reconciliation. The one good thing about these weekends has been spending time with my cousin Ryan. He's 16 and actually pretty cool. Dad recruited him to help with the heavier lifting since I'm not supposed to be around paint fumes too much. After Dad left us alone to work on the second weekend, Ryan told me something that confirmed my suspicions. Layla is still talking trash about me and Mom when Dad isn't around. Ryan overheard her on the phone with someone saying I was only helping to look good and that my mother had trained me well in manipulation. Yesterday, Dad called with news that Layla had been temporarily released from the hospital. Apparently, her condition had stabilized enough for a brief home stay. Then came the request I was dreading. Layla specifically wanted me to come by to discuss nursery colors since she was feeling much better. Something felt off about the whole thing, but I agreed to stop by, planning to keep it quick and focused only on the nursery. When I arrived at the house this morning, I expected to find Layla in bed or maybe on the living room couch. Instead, she was sitting in the nursery. She was flipping through paint samples and baby clothes catalogs. "There's my reluctant helper," she said when I walked in. "Your father tells me you've been quite the weekend warrior, but couldn't find time to visit me in the hospital." I tried to redirect to the actual reason I was there, the paint samples, but she wasn't having it. "You know, when this baby comes, we'll see who your father's real family is." I stayed quiet, focusing on the color swatches, but her pretense dropped completely after a minute of silence. "Let's be honest, I only asked for your help to please your father. He wants us to become a happy family." What came next made me realize something was wrong. She leaned forward slightly and said, "Maybe your mother's cancer will come back, and you'll understand what real family loyalty means." I felt deeply hurt at that moment. After years of taking her abuse and keeping quiet to keep the peace, I finally responded, "You've been awful to me since I was 10 years old. You've tried to poison my relationship with both my parents. You wished death on my mother, and now you're using this pregnancy to manipulate everyone." The transformation on her face was instant. One second she was smirking at me. The next, she was clutching her stomach and calling out, "David! David! Come quick!" Dad rushed in from somewhere else in the house and found Layla appearing to be in distress. As she told him, I attacked her verbally and said horrible things about the baby. I tried to defend myself, explaining what really happened, but Dad immediately took her side. "I knew this was a mistake. You need to leave right now before you cause more stress." I felt completely defeated as I gathered my things to leave. The familiar feeling of not being believed by my own father washed over me. As I headed toward the door, I noticed Ryan standing in the hallway. He had his phone partially hidden, but definitely pointed in our direction. The drive back to campus took a long time. I replayed the confrontation and felt anger and helplessness. About 20 minutes after I got back to my dorm, my phone pinged with a text from Ryan. "I got it all on video. She was fine until Uncle David left to pick up lunch. Let me know when you want me to send it." I burst into tears when I read it. Just having proof that I'm not crazy, that Layla really is this manipulative, felt like the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. I called my mom immediately and told her everything, including Ryan's text. She's driving up tomorrow to help me figure out what to do next. I haven't responded to Ryan yet. Part of me wants that video immediately, but another part is terrified of what happens when I use it. This isn't just about proving I'm right anymore. It's about potentially blowing up my dad's marriage while his wife is pregnant with my half-brother. The last thing I want is to cause actual stress that affects the baby, but I also can't keep being the villain in Layla's story. My phone has been blowing up with texts from Dad and other family members, all varying degrees of disappointed in me for attacking a pregnant woman on bed rest. I've muted all notifications for now because I honestly can't handle being gaslit by my entire paternal family. I'll try to respond to comments, but I'm meeting with my therapist for an emergency session this afternoon, so I might be slow to reply. This situation with Layla keeps getting more complicated, and I'm torn between finally exposing her true nature and worrying about how it might affect my unborn brother. I'll update again once I decide what to do with Ryan's video evidence. Now for the final update. Final update on the Layla saga. It's been one hell of a month. First, thank you to everyone who's supported me through this absolute nightmare. Your advice has been a lifeline. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and everything has completely imploded, though honestly, in the best possible way. The day after I posted, my phone blew up with texts and calls from Dad, all threatening legal consequences for supposedly endangering Layla, who'd been readmitted to the hospital with complications. He kept throwing around phrases like negligence and family duty, as if I was somehow legally obligated to care for my stepmom. My paternal family quickly split into two camps: those who believed I deliberately upset a high-risk pregnant woman, the majority, and those who started questioning the official story after Ryan apparently spoke to his mom. Aunt Clara actually called me to apologize, saying she had no idea things were that bad with Layla. Only took her 8 years to figure it out, but whatever. Ryan sent me the video that evening, and it was even worse than I expected. The footage clearly showed Layla looking perfectly fine while saying my mom's cancer should finish the job, and then hearing Dad returning. I sent it to my mom, who immediately drove up to campus again to help me figure out next steps. We consulted with a family lawyer the next day, who confirmed I had absolutely zero legal obligation in this situation. Despite Dad's threats, she helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter regarding the harassment and false accusations, which definitely dialed down the threatening messages. Amazing how quickly legal language shuts people up. For about a week, things were relatively quiet. A few relatives still sent passive-aggressive texts about family loyalty, but I just ignored them and focused on catching up with schoolwork I'd fallen behind on. Turns out, family drama isn't great for your GPA. Ryan kept me updated that Layla was still in the hospital, but supposedly stabilizing, and Dad was barely leaving her side except to shower and change clothes. Then yesterday evening, I got a call from the hospital. Not from Dad or a relative, from the hospital itself. The nurse said Layla was requesting my presence during a critical doctor's appointment regarding the pregnancy scheduled for early the next morning. I decided to go, partly out of curiosity and partly to finally end this situation once and for all. I walked into the hospital waiting room. Dad, Aunt Clara, and several other family members were already there, giving me reactions ranging from outright glares to confused acknowledgments. Dad looked absolutely terrible. He pulled me aside and explained, "Leela specifically asked for you to be in the room when the doctors give their update. She says she wants to make peace, whatever happens." I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak, or honestly believing a word of this making peace nonsense. The nurse led us to Layla's room, where she was lying in bed connected to various monitors. She looked worse than when I'd seen her last. She extended her hand toward me while the medical staff checked her vitals. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, loud enough for Dad to hear from the doorway. "I wanted us to be together as a family for this." Cue internal eye roll. After checking a few things, the doctor mentioned he needed to review some results and would be back shortly with the full update. Dad stepped out to take a call about work, and the second the door closed behind him, Layla's demeanor changed. "Here's the deal," she whispered, her voice suddenly steady and cold. "Either you publicly apologize to me in front of everyone for causing this crisis and commit to helping after the birth, or I'll make sure everyone knows you tried to hurt my baby." I stayed calm, thank you therapy, and quietly took out my phone. I pulled up the video Ryan sent, turned the volume up, and held it where Layla could see the screen. She watched herself on screen talking about my mother's cancer and then faking symptoms when Dad returned. "I have the whole thing," I said evenly, "including what you said about my mother's cancer. Dad needs to see who you really are." I hadn't noticed Dad had quietly returned and was standing in the doorway. He stepped into the room, staring at the phone as Layla tried to grab it from my hand. "Turn that off," she hissed. 8 years, Dad said. "For 8 years, OP told me you said these things, and I didn't believe her. I didn't want to believe her." The doctor and a nurse chose that exact moment to return, catching the tail end of the video. The doctor looked concerned but professional as he asked what was happening. Layla immediately launched into her victim routine, claiming I was harassing her, but Dad actually stopped her mid-sentence. "No more lies, Layla. I heard everything." I've never seen my father stand up to her like that before, ever. The doctor asked Dad and me to step outside while they stabilized Layla, who was now worked up. In the hallway, Dad just crumpled into a chair. We sat in silence for several minutes before he finally looked up at me. "I should have believed you," he said simply. "I'm so sorry." A quick note. Many commenters pointed out that my dad was as much of a problem as Layla since he enabled her behavior for years. You were absolutely right. His apology doesn't instantly fix everything, and I told him exactly that. The next few hours were a blur of medical staff, family members getting partial updates, and Dad having serious conversations with the doctors about Layla's mental state. They ended up placing her under psychiatric observation after she had what they called an extreme emotional episode when confronted with the video evidence. As for the baby, he's actually doing okay despite everything. They're monitoring him closely, but the doctors seem confident they can manage the pregnancy safely for at least a few more weeks to give his lungs time to develop better. Dad and I had a long talk last night, our first real conversation in years. He admitted he'd been choosing the easier path of believing Layla rather than confronting the truth about how she treated me. He cried when I told him about all the things she'd said and done that I'd never even reported. We're not magically fixed. There's a lot of damage to undo, but it's a start. I'm back in my dorm now, trying to process everything. Mom has been amazing through all this, never once saying, "I told you so," even though she absolutely could have. Ryan's become like the little brother I never had. Seriously, that kid is the real MVP in this story. And Dad, well, Dad's filing for separation and meeting with a family therapist to figure out next steps. Edit. Some people have asked about what happens with the baby now. Dad's committed to being in his son's life regardless of what happens with him and Layla. He's asked if I'd still want to help with the nursery, but this time just because he values having me involved, not as a manipulation tactic. I've agreed to help. My issues were never with my half-brother, only with Layla's treatment of me. Looking back at everything that's happened, I'm actually grateful in a weird way for this crisis. I know rebuilding a relationship with my dad will take time, but for the first time in years, I feel like it might actually be possible.